So in this video, it's going to be our last video proving triangles congruent, and it's just kind of adding one little extra step to what we've already been doing. So you have to say you can write a proof to prove two corresponding parts of the triangles are congruent to each other on the congruent triangle. So the ways we can prove triangles congruent, remember, side, 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 angle, 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 side, HL, but you cannot by these ways. So in the last lesson video that we had, that you needed these two things. You needed one concurrent statement for each part. So if I had angle, side, I need two angles, and then the side that's not included needs to be stated congruent. Or if HL, it needed to be a right triangle. If it was a right triangle, then the hypotenuse and the leg need to be congruent to the corresponding triangle. And then you could prove by this way. But in this lesson, we're actually having a step 3. Alright. So, if two triangles are congruent, then if I know these triangles are congruent, and you can see they are congruent by side, angle, side, then because they are congruent means they are exact same, they are equal. So I can state that, well, then angle D has to be congruent to angle A because these triangles are congruent. Or I can say CA, the side, has to be congruent to this side. Alright? Or I can say, lastly, the angle G is congruent to angle C. And that's all because I already knew these triangles are congruent. If they're the same, if these are all the same, well then everything else is the same. We call this corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So we're just saying parts that go together of two triangles that are the same have to be the same. For short, instead of writing this out every time, we say CPCTC, which stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Alright, so on these kind of proofs, we're going to do the first two steps like we did before. And then on the last part, we're going to prove the two parts are congruent, and our reason is going to be CPCTC. Alright. So how do you know you have a proof like that? In the past, we were proving that two triangles were congruent, like so. Well, now, instead of proving two triangles are congruent, I'm proving two angles are congruent. This is not given to you. This is what you're trying to prove. You have a given up here. So let me show you an example of a couple of proofs of what this would look like. Alright. So we have our statements. We have our reasons. Make our two columns very nice and organized. Alright. So just like before, you have your given. So our given is that AC is congruent to EC, and BC is congruent to DC, and that is given to us. Alright. So AC, EC, these are congruent, and BC congruent to DC. BC is congruent to DC. Alright, so we have two congruent statements. If I want to prove triangles congruent, I'm going to need 3 because they're not right triangles. Well, notice I have that X, so I have vertical angles. So I know this angle is congruent to that angle. So my step 2, I can say angle ACB is congruent to angle DCE. Well, why do I know that? Well, that is the vertical angle theorem. Alright, well now I have my 3 congruent statements, which again, things are disappearing on me. Alright, so now I have my 3 congruent statements, so I can state my triangles are congruent. So we have triangle AC C, E. And remember, order matters when we're writing our congruent statements like we've been practicing. Then triangle. So A goes with E. So E needs to go first. I can't just put down random letters. C and C do work together. And then D. So the reason they are congruent, when the situation we have side, angle, side. Alright. Well, now that I have, before this is where we would stop. We wouldn't do anything further. But I'm not trying to prove the triangle's congruent. I needed it to prove this. So I need to take it one step further. So it's just one more step than what we did before. So I'm going to say angle A is congruent to angle E. And the reason why, because these two triangles are congruent, that makes these two angles congruent, angle A and angle E. So that is my CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Alright, let's do one more proof together. And actually this one I'm going to make it a flow proof. We're going to do it a little different. Alright. So I'm going to draw boxes. So first, we're going to have our first given. K is the midpoint of DC. That's a little smaller so it fits. Right, and the reason I know that is that is given. Okay, so I have my statement and the reason in there. And then we're also going to say that OD, we'll write that out. OD is perpendicular to DK, and CJ is perpendicular to CK. Alright, and again that is also given to us. Alright, so since K is the midpoint of DC, so then I know that this is congruent to that. So I can make another box, state that DK is congruent to KC. And again, this is just a different look of proofs. It's the same thing. I'm just doing columns. I'm doing it in boxes. And the reason I know that is definition of the midpoint, because I use the midpoint. And then I just kind of draw an arrow saying it's going to here. Alright, so then I can use my next given, that I have OD is perpendicular. One is perpendicular, that creates right angles. And then, so I need to state those two angles are right. So angle D and angle C are right. Okay. Notice I didn't say they're congruent, because remember this is a two-part thing, and the reason I know they're right is definition of perpendicular. And then from there, because they're perpendicular, now I know they are congruent. So angle D congruent to angle C. And the reason I know that, all right angles are congruent.
We have messages in the...
Alright, so all right angles are congruent. So I was here, I went here, and then I went here. So now this is a congruent statement. We have two of them. We just need a third. So look at my diagram. I have two angles congruent, and I can see I have vertical angles. So down here, I can say angle OKD is congruent to angle CKJ. And the reason why is because they are vertical angles. So it's a vertical angle theorem. Alright, so now I have 3 congruent statements. So my next step from there is I can state that the 2 triangles are congruent. I still need to do that first. So I can state my 2 triangles. Remember, order matters. DKO is congruent to triangle. D goes with C, K goes with K, O goes with J. And the reason they're congruent, I have angle, side, angle. Alright. So I went from here, these all kind of went together, all gave me this. And now I can go from here to here, which I can do my last step, which is what I'm trying to prove. The angle O is congruent to angle J. So angle O is congruent to angle J. And that is because they're congruent, so my corresponding parts are congruent. CPCTC. And you're done. To review, remember the ways that we have to prove triangles are congruent. Alright? Before we were just proving 2 triangle congruents, now we're proving corresponding parts congruent. It is usually just 1 more step. Sometimes it may be 2 more depending on what you're trying to prove, but usually it's just 1 more step than what we were doing before. Reminder to do your reflection so you get credit for watching this video.